Welcome to Regen360. More than ever, we need to step it up to regenerate the health of the planet and all living things. We exist to help educate, inspire, and accelerate transformational action. Here's your host, David Gottfried.
Hey, it's David Gottfried. Today's conversation is with a good friend I've known for 3 decades, one of the gurus of energy efficiency for the world and certainly the US, Ashok Gupta. Ashok is at NRDC. He's been there for the 3 decades, and he has just such a long legacy of helping green buildings for cities and transforming our power network to adopt renewables and wind and go all electric. He's won so many awards for his work at NRDC and his decades of innovation. The biggest is probably the ACEEE recognized Ashok's work, giving him a Lifetime Leadership Award. He won the USGBC's Leadership Award, Solar One's Environmental Steward Award. He's a rocket scientist with a degree in math and physics at Georgetown University and a master's in economics from American University. I think you'll enjoy this friendly conversation as we're close friends. Our careers have paralleled each other. We met first when he gave me a tour of his green building at NRDC, probably the first green building in the US. So please join us. So great to have you here today, Ashok. We've been friends for, I counted it out, 3 decades since we met in New York at NRDC, and I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
Good to be here, and I remember our first meeting fondly over at 40 West 20th Street.
Hard to believe it's 30 years. So much has happened in the world with carbon, with our lives. We built families too, and here we are decades later. That was fun because that was the first green building, I believe, in the US that you did for NRDC. And I was so excited to meet you and what you showed me, beautiful design that Randy Croxton had done. What a pioneer you guys were.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give credit to my colleagues, David Goldstein and Rob Watson, who were very, very involved and hands-on. I mean, I arrived a couple of years after the building was finished, so I got to enjoy being in it and showing it off to people like you when you visited. But yes, Randy Croxton was the architect, and we had great engineers, but we really did have good staff support and leadership from David and Rob, who you know as well. So I was following in their footsteps, as we all follow in somebody's footsteps. And so yes, I was very lucky to be a resident of a nice renovation.
Well, who would think 3 decades later, we're here still talking about the future and how to accelerate and scale. But also since that tour, we created the US Green Building Council, and with Rob's great leadership, the LEED Green Building Rating System that NRDC supported. And later years, I did the World GBC in 70 countries now. But here we are still on the same topic that brought us together 3 decades ago. It's interesting in reflecting for our chat today. Sometimes I do this, I looked up when we met, which I think was 1991, how many particles per billion of CO2 was there in the world and how much today, and how many people were there and how many today. So we had 5.4 billion then and 7.8 almost now. That's a 43% increase here on Earth. Of course, we've exceeded the carrying capacity more. And then carbon is up 18%. But just after we met in 91, it had already exceeded the 350 particles per million carrying or scientific threshold and now we're at 419.
Yes, things have definitely become partly more challenging, but I look at the glass half full as well and say that we have started to decarbonize the power sector quite significantly during this period, certainly in the US. I mean, when you look at it globally, it's still not declining because of growth in developing countries, but because of the growth in wind and solar, and we've been able to really turn the corner on decarbonizing the power sector, which, as we talk later today, will really help us as we want to decarbonize the building sector, and still the important role that efficiency will play, even as we are dealing with the fuels and the electricity that goes into our buildings. So the work that I've been doing and NRDC has done for decades has been to really focus on both the electric grid and the power sector and making that cleaner and cleaner. And this was, partly Clean Air Act, and large part was renewable portfolio standards at the state level. It was the production tax credit and investment tax credit. So we can connect the dots and at least look at what's going on here in terms of the power sector and how that is very, very important part of what's going on in buildings, at least from an energy and carbon perspective.
We've done such great work at NRDC. You've had your hands on everything from the Pataki green building tax credit and pushing New York City green with Bloomberg, and your great work now in Kansas City in the Midwest. As you hit the power sector, certainly 3 decades ago, solar was probably 10 to 30 times more expensive. We didn't maybe dream it would be where we are. But at the same time, I don't know that we expected climate change to be so far out. And now we're at 1.1 degrees C over the targets, the base they had, I guess it was the industrial base they used. And we're almost at the 1.5 of the Paris Agreement. So how do you reflect on that, both this incredible success in renewables, solar for sure, and wind and batteries, and your great work there, at the same time, the steep growth of carbon dioxide and climate change?
Well, it's a race, right? I mean, question is making sure that, we're trying to reduce the level of impact we know is already taking place and will keep taking place because of all the carbon we've already put in the atmosphere historically. And so as you're dealing with growth from all over the world and increased economic activity, the question is really, how do we make sure that our energy sources are carbon free as fast as possible? And how do we make sure that our demand in buildings and transportation and industry are, being managed? So this is a race to minimize impact, but a lot of the impact is built in already. And so we're dealing with obviously figuring out how to adapt as the same times we're trying to mitigate the worst impacts. So it's really, the job is clearly, all hands on deck. But the good news again is that the cost of the good stuff, the cost of solutions that we know exist, keep declining. I mean, wind and solar and LEDs and batteries have all declined by 90% in the last 10 years. Yeah. So we're trying to deal with what's been in the system and how to replace things and do things smarter and better, even as we come up with more solutions we're going to need and more technology and so on. So even we have this challenge of even deploying what we already have at scale and coming up with new solutions at the same time, and then doing this globally and not just here in the US, or obviously EU is often leading the way. And right. So we just have to kind of, as somebody who's worked on this for 30 years, I just wake up every day saying, okay, let's roll up our sleeves literally and get to work and do more. We don't have any, we don't have the luxury of time. We still have to minimize the impacts whatever is already built in is there. But the good news is, at least on the power sector side, and this is why the work that I've been doing in Missouri and Kansas recently has been around how can we accelerate the retirement of dirtier generation,
Right.
because we know the cleaner stuff is, newer stuff is much, much cleaner and less expensive. So it's all, a lot of it becomes an economic issue of, retirements and sunk costs and financing. And how do you manage transitions when the better stuff is less expensive?
Yeah, I was fascinated to dive into some of your work on securitization, and where you figured out creative bonds and financial income streams through the ratepayers to retire these dirty stranded assets, whether it's a coal plant, generally coal plants, I would guess. Tell us a little bit about that, because that's interesting. In the case study you reference in some of your papers, you can retire it, pay it off, get it off the books of the utility, and then save tons of money for the ratepayers, even though they agree over 20 years to pay for it. Tell us a little more about that, because it seems like in your race and our desire to accelerate and scale the good, you got to get to the heart of economics.
Yeah, I mean, it was 4 or 5 years ago, I was looking at, what was going on in Missouri and Kansas. And I was actually specifically interested in energy efficiency and saying we should be investing in a lot more energy efficiency than we were. And came up with, people were always saying that doing these efficiency programs was going to raise rates for customers. And it was like, no, efficiency programs are so much less, expensive than existing generation.
Like, wake
so
up.
The question is, why
hello.
are we, how do we need to deal with the existing generation issue? And then you look at the question of utility assets and how they recover their costs. So some of the country is deregulated and utilities don't own power plants anymore, but a large part of the country, utilities still own power plants. And these costs have not been depreciated. They're still on the books of these utilities. And they, we needed to solve the problem of those sunk costs that were still on utility books, and how could the utilities recover those costs, and we could move forward, but do it in a way that would be good for consumers at the same time. And this is where, this was a tool that other states had used. I mean, this was done being done in 20 some states, where you're trying to deal with the difference between a book value and market value of a power plant. And this happened in New York. Con Edison, when they were selling off all their generation, had to use this tool. And so the idea was to bring this tool here to the Midwest. And Colorado and New Mexico had just done it as well, just before I started working on this in Missouri and Kansas. And all the tool is really being able to access very low cost capital, much lower than the utility cost of capital, right, by assuring bondholders that they can be paid back from, so these are ratepayer backed bonds. And so, so if you can get 2 to 3% interest rate, you can really help pay for those sunk costs and replace the more expensive with cleaner generation. And utilities also make more money on renewable assets because they don't make any money on the fuel part of a coal plant. They only make money on the capital part as well. So right, it was basically coming up with a solution that would be good for utility investors, good for customers, and good for the environment. And that's why, getting this legislation passed, even in Missouri, with only one no vote in both houses, it was because we could come up with a solution with lots of different winners, and in my view, no real losers in terms of the construct. So yes, we have to be very creative, because we have to do this work in all 50 states, in conservative states, and we need to make this transition faster, and we need to use our economic tools and economic arguments, so it won't be and can't always be led with the climate imperative, which,
Right.
we do it for that reason, but other people might want to do it for different reasons. And we have to come up with solutions that allow people to come into solving this problem for good economic reasons and jobs and other factors that are also always in the mix.
There's actually an alignment here that you've always known, is that the essence of real wealth and value is health. And an essence of health is life sustaining. And it turns out that solar and wind and these renewables that have a low footprint actually can have a financial return. So it's this big turning where wealth and value is following this approach. But implicit in there is a waking up of a financial acumen, of these tools, of selling the legislature and government. This is not bad. This is actually great. In fact, this is how you make money. Wake up.
Yeah, switching to buildings for a second. I mean, on the health question, I mean, for me right now, when I talk about energy efficiency and buildings, I focus on actually, especially when we're talking about affordable housing and low and moderate income, buildings, and which are very, very leaky. If we're talking about fixing buildings, we're talking about buildings and making them more comfortable for the occupants.
Right.
Whether it's tenants, office, schools, basically, that's related to the health question, but even just comfort, especially when we have more and more extreme weather events, and people spend the most amount of money heating and cooling their buildings. So the extreme weather events are tied to having very high bills during winter and summer months. It's also tied to people being incredibly uncomfortable in buildings because they're incredibly leaky.
Right.
So if you want to be more comfortable, save money, address the peakiness of the electric utility demand curve that we have to build for and manage for in terms of extreme weather events. So to me, as I think about buildings nowadays and energy efficiency, it is always going to be about, for building occupants, building residents, it's about more comfort, lower energy cost, managing extreme weather events for, related to utilities. That's what's driving up the cost of electricity. So if you want to do reliability of the grid, affordability for occupants, you have to think about the building envelope, and how to improve the building envelope is going to be key in the next 5 or 10 years. And the more efficient we can make our buildings, the more we can also free up electricity to be used for transportation. Because otherwise we're going to be challenged with building more transmission line, more solar and wind farms that are, hard to site. So if you want to solve this problem in a multivariate way, building envelope is going to be a really important part of it deals with people. Start with people, comfort of people. It deals with their pocketbooks. So, people who pay those bills because their buildings are very leaky, and large portion of their bill is for during those winter and summer days, right? When they're heating and cooling is a huge part of their energy cost.
Yeah, the peak.
Yeah. So, and then for the utilities, they're building the whole system for those peaks. So we pay a lot of money to keep things. The example I use, somebody told me about this, is like if you were running a truck delivery system and you were basically buying another truck to deliver a package one day a year, and you were keeping an extra 20% trucks around in case other trucks broke down, and you have to pay for all of it whether you're using it or not. That's how we do the electric system round, because we have not had battery storage, and even battery storage will solve some of that. But battery storage is not going to be inexpensive, and battery storage might be 4 hours and eventually longer duration, and that's another cost.
Well, and it's not generating battery storage. Yeah. It's just you can use it for a load shift to get the load off.
If you can shape the demand curve though through better efficiency, right? better envelope can help you shape the demand curve. You can lower the peaks and fill in the valleys. So you want people to charge at night their electric cars and lower their peaks, their air conditioning and space heating demand, because you have a better envelope, right? So it's not, so, some people talk about just load response, you turn things down. I'm talking about really improving building envelope,
Right.
to really shift the, lower demand during those hot summer days and cold winter days.
Well, you've nailed it. It's so interesting because when we met 30 years ago, we were talking about the envelope, and us kind of techie types in buildings, we always focus on the envelope first. It's and your work and Amory Loveman's, the negawatt concept he had in the late 70s was, guess what? You don't need an extra watt of energy, even if it's solar. Take it out of efficiency, that the leaky vessel. So the insulation, the better windows, the higher R values in the roof and the crawl space, and then that leak. Beyond all that, and yet then solar does so well now. It's cheap and there are tax credits. We think you need the solar on the roof to fuel your Tesla or your Prius. The first place to go is tighten up your insulation and your leaky windows, which fuels your electric vehicle.
Yep. So you hit the nail on the head. I mean, certainly when at the NRDC offices, we used to say, we put our money into more efficient windows so we could downsize our air conditioning system. And there was no reason for us to let all the heat in and then cool it during those hot summer days. If we could keep that heat out, we wouldn't need as much air conditioning. It was simple as that. I think we used to call it heat mirror glass, right? It was kind of like reflects the heat out and reflects the heat in. In winter months, you reflect the heat back in, and in the summer months, you reflect the heat back out. And that was such a key part of doing what we did. And I think the Empire State Building, when they renovated, did the same thing with all of their windows. And NRDC upgraded their windows not long ago. And actually this room that I'm in, same windows that they put in the Empire State Building in our New York office. When we renovated this room, we said, let's get the best windows we can, because on the coldest day, you can put your hands on these windows and you're not going to feel anything. We used to say in the New York office, our windows were better than our walls in terms of insulation. And so, so the windows issue, and I'll just add one other, the whole passive design movement too, in terms of being able to build buildings now that are 80–90% more efficient than building codes is such a key. And I have to brag on Kansas City, which is we have the most energy efficient apartment building, passive certified, right downtown Kansas City. It's also transit friendly because it's right by our new streetcar in the city market area. So you can build these buildings. We know the technology. Europe's been doing it. So as you can see, I get pretty excited about building envelope, because I do think it solves many of the problems we're concerned about. We're concerned about equity and affordability, concerned about health and comfort, worried about the grid and its reliability in terms of peaks. Building envelope is going to be such a key over the next 10 years, not only for new construction, but obviously for rehab as well.
But it seems like people forgot about it. They went to solar, they want batteries, they want electric vehicles, they want the cool technology, the apps that control it all. And yet they forget, hey, you can blow cellulose into an old wall between the studs. You can upgrade your windows. Our roofs don't have to be black and have the heat island effect. And you probably know what percent, if everyone tightened up their homes in existing old homes and old office buildings, learn from your passive solar, I think there's at least 50% energy savings there.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, so the question is really, how do we get that, right? So how do we harvest all of that wasted energy? And the challenge is institutionally, I mean, just like, so the next question is like, why doesn't it happen? How do you make it happen? But yes, there's definitely a lot of energy to be mined in our wasted energy. And right now, I mean, this is not to say we need the electric vehicles, we need the solar panels, we need the renewables on the electric grid, but we also still need efficiency. I mean, what I want to make sure is people who think that because if we can generate all our electricity that's as carbon free, and we can electrify all of our homes and buildings, we don't need to worry about being energy efficient anymore. So I'm questioning that from an economic perspective, because the idea of generating all that clean electricity and then wasting half of it is not a good strategy from an affordability point of view, and or upstream impacts of even just siting and building renewables and transmission. So you want to make sure from a systems point of view, if you want to electrify the transportation system, you have to be making our buildings more efficient to free up electricity for other uses. Yeah. So you can't have this system of like, we can waste all the electricity we want in our buildings and we're going to still electrify everything, and we're going to solve our problem by making sure all our electricity is carbon free. That doesn't compute it for me from an economic perspective. In theory, you might say that gets you to the carbon reduction you want, but at a much, much higher cost.
It's almost like, well, it's gluten-free. I can eat unlimited amounts of that serving, but no, there are calories. So you still gain weight. I don't know if that's a health analogy, but if everyone's here, let's just hammer a little more. What Ashok is saying is get your loads down first. Have your energy in your house.
Or simultaneously, even, I mean, I know for some people, putting solar panel is very exciting and something they can show off to your neighbors and so on. So I'm saying, put your solar panel on your house and buy your electric car, but don't forget about energy efficiency. So it doesn't even have to be first. It just has to be, as an economist, I would say, yes, do it first. But as a realist, I know people like their solar panels and electric cars. And we have solar panels here and we have an electric car. And my view is we will need to do all of those things. But from a systems point of view and from a cost point of view, don't forget about efficiency.
Yeah, and I don't want to be negative because I added solar 3 times to my roof. I don't have 2 inches left. Obsessed with, of course, net zero. We went all electric in our cars here, and I love it. But at the same time, I super insulated the walls, the windows. I got every insulation and blew in foam, because we love the solar, but why pay for double the solar if you get your loads half? You can save 15 grand in your solar.
And so the answer to that question is part what we should talk about too, which is it's harder to do some of the efficiency stuff we want. So there are other challenges to, basically going out and buying an electric car, if you have the money, is not that hard. But dealing with contractors and getting your home fixed up to be more efficient is much more challenging for people. So the whole idea, like even of doing the building energy exchange in New York, and we're doing the same thing now in Kansas City and St. Louis, or setting up the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation, which was about how to finance building efficiency, because there's upfront cost and there's ongoing savings, the role of utility incentive programs. So as you know, we've all spent a lot of time figuring out, okay, efficiency makes sense, it's good to do, but you can lose a lot of brain cells figuring out how to do it. And how do we make it easier and simpler for people to do it? How do we provide the right technical assistance, financing, hand-holding, workforce training? There's so many other things. And so our hope right now in terms of this next phase of work on buildings, we are looking at both policy, but we're also looking at market support.
Right.
How to make it easier for people to do this. My assumption going in is people want to do this, are interested in doing it. It's just hard to do, and we haven't spent the time making it easier for people to do.
That's so important. And I know you've previously said the money is generally available, but the how-to is hard. And the whole supply chain and the labor and sourcing, very important. I'd like to shift right now as we're chatting. We just finished day 5 of COP26 in Glasgow. It's a big event for the world to get together to see how we're going to meet the Paris climate agreement and stay below 1.5 degrees centigrade. Of course, the data is not too great on our performance on Earth. What are your reflections 5 days in, Ashok? There's been a lot of commitments from financing initiatives. I'm not going to say it right, but it's GFANCE, the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, where all the big banks got together representing, I think, $100 trillion. There's been commitments on deforestation, natural gas, not financing fossil fuels, et cetera. Biden was there, China was not there, and India, made some commitments. What's your reflection on what you've heard to date? Are these just words? Is there a backbone? Can we move the needle in this race?
So, NRDC has a pretty big team there. So we are definitely doing everything we can to make sure the world makes those commitments and promises and takes the actions that are necessary. But as we've been talking about other stuff, the key will be then what happens when COP26 is over. And this is where we all still have to kind of make sure everything that is said and promised is delivered on. So I think just like, any legislation, the legislation is just sometimes feels like a culmination of a process. It's just the beginning of the next phase, which is implementation. So to me, COP26 will be, again, glass half full. There'll be lots of good promises made, commitments made, but we will have to make sure that people follow through, implement, and go further. And so there's no shortcut here, right? That's the bottom line. And I think these forums are important to kind of draw attention to the topic, get people to talk about it and say what they're going to do. But we all know that if, these are, what's binding, and even if it's binding, what does it mean to be binding, and who enforces it? So this is kind of a process where you try to get more awareness, more commitment, more buy-in, more public support, and you never stop focusing on the next day after COP26 ends on implementation and doing the hard work of actually getting the emissions reduced.
You're so right, because some of the NGOs are highly critical of saying, enough talking, we need some doing. And I even wrote down some quotes. Here's 900,000 people signed this quote: "This is not a drill, it's code red for the earth." The French president Macron said, we need greater ambition. Others said, well, the US is nothing new. Some countries signed agreements on deforestation yesterday and backed off today when they realized what it really meant, what they agreed to. So how, the day after, where's your head in NRDC? How do we capitalize on these grand statements and how do we move the needle? One of the stats today from an important organization, the Global Carbon Project, said at the current full out emissions rate, which is now 5% more than 2020, we have only 11 more years at that full out rate until we hit 1.5 degrees C. So where does your brain go with this dilemma and trying to be proud of the legacy that you've had? How do you get deep into the human nature, into the brain that wants the solar or the Tesla and not the insulation? That's hard work.
Yeah, I go back to what I said earlier. I mean, we need all that pressure. We need people to be critical of just talk. We need we need people pushing, right? We need people to say we're not doing enough. That's just part and parcel of how we try to get more ambition and more commitments and getting people to be smarter. So we need all that. We need all that energy pushing for more. So I have no complaints about the criticism. We also know then there's, how do we take the commitments and then make them real so we can do more? So it's, again, it's not this or that, it's and. So we need to keep pushing for more and have more ambition. We need to deliver on the promises that are made. And none of this is easy. I mean, we have a saying, if it was easy, we wouldn't be working on it, right? It'd already be done. So nothing we do or we're talking about is easy to do, but that is the calling, that is the charge, is to do the hard stuff. And so we need the activists, the advocates, the people pushing hard, saying we're not doing enough, to keep pushing us to do more, make bigger commitments, go faster and faster. And we still have to implement those commitments that people do make and don't follow up on. And we have to do it in places, where there's support, and then places where there's not as much support. And we have to use every argument that we can find, So I think that, I'm now in the Midwest working on this in difficult states, but I think we have to work in difficult states to make the arguments that will work around better buildings and, lower cost electricity and so on, because, you have to use the jobs argument, the economic argument, the health arguments, and we have no choice but to win. And winning just may mean a lot less impact than there would be otherwise, because, things continue to get more and more challenging, but that's what we do, right? So I look at everything that's going on around the world. I mean, it's kind of, part of it's invigorating. I mean, we didn't get this level of attention to carbon or climate policy, in the past. That more attention now, it's more a front page story than ever. It's getting more attention than ever, and that's good. Even if some of the promises are kind of not that, as you say, make a promise one day and break it the next day. I mean, that's kind of, but it's still, I think overall,
yeah,
there's more tension, which is good, more commitments, which is good. We need more follow-up. We need better implementation. Global governance is not an easy area, right? There's very few things we do well around getting every country in the world to agree to do something.
Well, we have the right parties are there. I mean, there's CEOs of monster banks managing trillions of dollars of assets, talking about how they lend money and shifting their money from financing fossil fuels to renewables. And you got to
I heard a statement today, just to interrupt. I mean, that there's no shortage of money. The question is there a revenue stream? from that investment. So how do you kind of tie the fact that there is capital, but is there a revenue stream? And so we have to kind of, this is where we need to kind of even get more precise around what kind of return do people expect for their investment, and how do we make the transitions, and how do we allow for, you know, a building owner that's going to make the investment in a better building to get a revenue stream associated with it. And so finance will show up. I forget who said it today. I just read this as a headline that basically the issue was not money or finance, it was revenue stream. And it kind of stuck to me in terms of saying, you know, yeah, I mean, we've known that it's, you know, there's no shortage of money or capital. The question is it going into the right things? And if it's not going in the right things, what are the reasons why it's not going into the better things in terms of what does the revenue stream look like? And some of it is just the way we've always, it's inertia. So getting people to switch to things that will give them a revenue stream, but they just don't understand, they put a higher risk on it. So when I'm talking to people about energy efficiency investments, people just don't understand how to do underwriting for energy efficiency. They think it's much riskier than it really, really is.
No, it's reliable.
So part of what you need to do is figure out how to get somebody to come in to de-risk that capital. Like how can you know, what's the role of government or utilities?
Or insurance, they can
to de-risk the financing.
If you insure the revenue stream, that's how you get good bond rates and the low interest rate.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we're trying to do with some of this work around efficiency financing, is saying, okay, because if you come in and offer somebody 5, 6, 7% interest rate to do efficiency, you know, it may be okay, but you know, you may need to do something lower to get the interest of the builders and the real estate industry. And like I said, and anyway, so it's a longer conversation, but the idea here is to focus on why capital isn't available and how do builders think about their efficiency investment part of their capital stack in deciding what they will do or not do, and what falls by the wayside and what stays in and what is valued, and so on and so on. So there's clearly a role for policy. There's also a role for this market transformation part of showing why this is not only it's not a technology risk, it's just really an execution risk where people don't understand how to deliver on this, and how, as a lender, how do you underwrite this? You know, how do you make sure that, you know, in a way with solar panels, there's a whole different psychology around risk and underwriting for efficiency versus other things.
Some of it is, well, it's a whole nother discussion, but I always look at the equations for those revenue streams and calculating the internal rate of return or the present value of your future cash flows. But the equations, of course, are always flawed. First of all, they'll work, but then we don't price externalities by and large, which would make this 100x the return. But we're shifting on that. I don't want to, that'll be our next discussion on externalities, and I call it what is the full equation. The numbers still work. But I want to wrap up with your long career at NRDC. You've been at the forefront of all these issues. Even in this discussion, you're celebrating, pushing harder, winning the race, implementation, how to get there. Your brain's, what do we do the day after COP? Why? Why do you do that? Why have you focused a whole career on that? Why do you keep pushing?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, for me, the most fun part of doing this work and being at NRDC is all the people I've had a chance to work with. So you have to enjoy the work you do and the teams you work with, and both externally and internally. I've been very, very lucky. So NRDC has great people, incredible resources. So I have to start with what makes it doable and interesting and fun and challenging is that I found a place where I could do this work and have the support and have the team. And NRDC's just kept, I mean, the people on our cities team, the people on our affordable housing effort called Efficiency for All. I mean, we've just built even bigger and bigger efforts on the building side alone in the last, 10 years. So to me, what keeps me going is knowing, not just the importance of the work, is knowing that every day you can get up and make a difference and get a chance to work with a lot of really, really good people. And you build your team. I mean, right now, I mean, for me in Missouri and Kansas, a lot of the people I work with daily are people, just you build your teams, right? They don't even have to be within NRDC. They're external partners. They're new organizations that you help start. And so, but NRDC gives us the room to do that. And so what motivates me is the challenge and the opportunity to work with some really, really good people.
And at the next level, what defines really good people is they care like you. They want to heal Earth. They want to address these issues. And so they're kind of shining lights that you get to collaborate with.
Yep. A lot of passion. It's great. I mean, there are, new people coming in every day to NRDC with a lot of passion, a lot of drive, a lot of new ideas, and that's pretty exciting. And so, so I think, and like I said, with other NGOs as well. I mean, it's just a good chance to partner with folks, and and that struggle brings people. You bond with everybody. I mean, we met 30 years ago, so there was a shared mission and interests, and you connect with people over the years, and you're in it for the whole journey, right? So I think the struggle is part of it, right? I just, as you said, so I just did 30 years at NRDC, and it was good to see all the people at NRDC that I've had the fun working with, and they're just a great bunch of people that I feel very lucky to be able to chance to work with them.
Well, I feel that about your work, and here we met almost your first year and my first year in pre-green building, and I felt then, as I feel now, we're bonded because we're brothers or comrades in turning Earth to sustain and regenerate, and that's the work.
No, I appreciate that, and and there's plenty more to do. And as I was telling colleagues, that I'm just starting my second 30 years at NRDC.
Love it. Well, we can't thank you enough for what you've done and your inspiration, your innovations, and your tenacity. And here you are starting again. So thank you, Ashok. It's been so nice to reconnect with you.
Thank you for the opportunity to share some thinking here with you.
You've been listening to Regen360 with your host, David Gottfried.